Hello, and welcome back to SPL Special, the show where I take Pokemon way too seriously. Last episode, I reviewed the mid-season standings and games that I thought highlighted the best of what SPL 3 had to offer. This time, I will be reviewing 4 more battles, but from the last 4 weeks of the season. For the latter part of this episode, I'll dedicate the rest of my time discussing playoffs and my brief thoughts on each of the 6 players who made it. And then, I'll show off the playoff bracket for the coming weeks. Before we review this series' battles, let's look at the final standings from the regular season. Now, if this looks familiar, then you're correct to assume not much has changed from the mid-season review. Surprisingly, there were no major upsets that I personally speculated would have happened, such as Forest City Phalanx's Ree winning on the Rochester Weather Division, or either Flower City Feral Gators Colton or Los Angeles Clefable's Trey winning out in the Zero Rings Division. Not to say that there weren't any close calls, but at that point in the tournament, anyone with 4 or more losses in the draft was more than likely blocked from entering playoffs. What these last 4 weeks really did was decide the playoff seedings for those who made it, which I'll discuss later. But for now, let's look at more battles. This first battle comes all the way from Week 7, that of Oklahoma City Thunder's Haj versus Philadelphia Empoleon's Devontae. Both being the top spots of their respective divisions, the outcome heading into this match would be hard to tell, with each of their teams excelling in different aspects, Devontae's team being one of the most versatile in the league. It doesn't look like it, but the selections of mons like Barraskewda, Tapu Lele, Hydreigon, Quagsire, Vikavolt, and Mega Pinsir cover each other's weaknesses soundly, and on top of that, hit extremely hard. For most in the league, prepping for Dev's team has been difficult for these reasons, and the results showed as of Week 7. Devontae had been undefeated. As for Haj, we have yet another versatile team with the added weather effect of Mega Charizard Y's sun. Mons such as Great Tusk, Hisuian Arcanine, and Venusaur all liked when the sun was out to boost attacks and activate respective abilities, with additional team members such as Kling Klang and Copalion acting as support. So, we start the battle slowly, both Haj and Dev setting new hazards and screens. Dev's strategy here seems to be wearing down his opponent with rocks and toxic damage, which gradually increases damage as a Pokemon stays in. Dev's already somewhat bulky team is also bolstered by the use of White Screen early on, a screen that has special attack in order to blunt Haj's team. Our first 2 KOs of the match come from Haj's Kling Klang and Dev's Tapu Lele, which was one massive threat gone, as Tapu Lele had been terrorizing most of the tournament up until that point. Turn 20, we have another turning point, the matchup of Hydreigon and Cobalion. Dev's Dragon-type sweeper is neutered by Cobalion's Thunder Wave, and is forced to attack every turn to maintain a strong position. Presumably, Dev overpredicts a switch out into Latios after he revealed the move Earthquake to Cobalion, which it's weak to. And he used the move Crunch, which Latios was weak to. This goes in Haj's favor, as despite Cobalion fainting due to Crunch, so too does Hydreigon faint from recoil damage immediately after, and Charizard returns to the battle once more. The match progresses further as both teams chip each other and pivot out, as giving any additional ground would be detrimental to either side at this point. Despite the less team members, Devontae having both Crobat and Hisuian Goodra as his last 2 members was a great thing, as the speed and bulk both provided to each other could have stolen him the game. It surely contributed to a much closer game than what we've seen from the two. In the end, I think Haj maintaining his weather and his most weather-reliant team member in Great Tusk secured him the victory, as it was a tough duo to crack through. Latios having a lot of free reign after Hydreigon's defeat was also great for Haj. This was overall one of the best matches we've seen, as I was thoroughly impressed with both players being put under a lot of pressure to perform here, and it could have gone either way. Up next, we have Python versus Fendi. This one also ended up being extremely close, as Python admittedly had a strong team going into this. Turn 1 was interesting, as both led with their best team member, Palafin and Dragapult. Python's Regieleki pivoted out immediately and fell to a Draco Meteor, bringing Palafin back in with its activated ability, Zero to Hero. This gives Palafin an extreme boost of power from having a starting base attack of 70 and 53 special attack to more than doubling it with 160 and 106 respectively. Toxapex is brought out in response and predicts an Ice Punch which barely puts a dent into the 152 base defense behemoth. Playing to Dylan's strengths, his team relies on having more stamina than his opponent, and we see this here as Python struggles to make gains throughout the match. Like our first highlight, it's a big game of pivoting into moves to resist it and then to chip damage in return. On turn 14, Fendi sacks forward just to bring out Mamoswine, something we should be very familiar with from the last episode, and revenge kills the Pokemon Gholdengo, the Steel Ghost type Pokemon that's tricky to play against. More pivots occur as Dylan buys the time to get something like Dragon pulled out successfully, which he does, but misses at a critical moment, causing it to fall earlier than he probably would have liked. This is great for Python, as now Fendi has much less breathing room to play with, and must preserve talk specs for as long as possible. We see a bit of a spiral here, as Palafin and Meowscarada tear through the rest of Dylan's team, while Toxapex comes out to use his very limited 8 recovers it has. I feel that if Python had played any better here, or if luck had gone even more in his favor, we would have seen the only loss for Dylan this season, as due to the nature of recovery moves this generation, stall Pokemon have been greatly neutered in their ability to cheat death. Fortunately for Dylan, he had just a single recover left to ensure Palafin lost the war of attrition, and he won with an extremely close 1-0. I gotta say, for Python's sake, he, like Doji, probably had one of the most challenging brackets in SPL. Not that anyone in particular had it easy, but it's matches like these that prove Python had a decent shot in picking playoffs, but just came up short. Our third match is a special one, that of Winters versus Los Angeles Clefable's Trey. Let's start with the latter. Trey took over his replacement on Week 3 with grace and had been on a warpath, scoring win after win up until this match. Winters was the complete opposite, failing to win any kind of match up until now. A real David and Goliath moment for SPL, and it's perhaps with this match that consequently cursed the rest of the season, as after this one occurred, no one had been safe from the odd-defying RNG, but I'll talk about those in a later episode. I'll keep this one brief and focus your attention on a particular Pokemon, Kingler. You guys know Kingler, right? One of the 151? Just a crab, lobster thing? Yeah, this thing was cracked this match. Winters actually had a great strategy for Kingler, and it was to keep it alive long enough to unleash its absurdly powerful crab hammer against its opponent and then switch it out when he was in a bind. And it worked. Trey's Dusclops was an issue for Winters, so he brought out Tyrantrum and knocked it out, and then froze the switch in Hatterene, which would have posed a massive risk for Winters' team after setting up. We can skip around a bit as most of the moves were pivots, although for some reason Trey brought Cleffa to the match, one of his low-tier picks which was geared for utility. Crabhammer claims another victim, and this is where we enter the cursed timeline, as after Zamazenta raises his attack 3 stages, he misses against Winters' Cresselia, and with Cresselia having a chance to be paralyzed 1/4 of the time, chips it successfully to death, and finally stacks Kingler to bring out Scovillain, a Pokemon Trey's remaining Gomora and Cleffa can't withstand, and thus starting a deadly curse that affected 2 top players, maybe even more, later in the season. And finally, a quick review of arguably the most consequential player of SPL this season. I'd like to reintroduce Forest City Phalanx's Re back into the fold. I'll speak more about them next episode, but their season was, suffice to say, a little mid, with the exception of their divisional run. Speaking personally with my match against them, I think I would have won regardless of the massive blunder they made, which was having a website extension automatically terrestrialize their Sinistcha, which is forbidden in the draft, thus forcing a forfeit. It's after this match that he did something that I think wouldn't be possible, changing the playoff seeding for the Rochester Weather Division. Which brings us into our next segment, the playoffs. With these battles covered and out of the way, let's look at our 6 finalists of SPL 3. Back to the leaderboard, we see that Fendi, me, Devontae, Haj, Ryan, and Trey are all in the top 6, but playoff seeding takes into account divisional titles and wildcards, the 2 best non-divisional leaders with the highest win ratio. So with that in mind, how do playoffs look? Here's the bracket. The standings look deceiving, but Shep, who was in 7th, has the 4 seed, while Ryan and Devontae, who are 6th and 3rd respectively, have much lower seeding and are forced to compete in quarterfinals to cement an Elite 4 position. So let's talk about that. Let's start with a familiar name, Garden City Glades' Ryan, the SPL 2 champion. In both my original script and initial predictions, I had foreseen Ryan taking the 2nd bye-week slot for the season. However, Sinistcha Gaming struck hard, and one of the wildest and most infuriating matches of the season. With this 3rd loss in Week 10, they went from a divisional title win to the lower wildcard slot. Despite a crushing defeat, Ryan is all too familiar with this position, as it was from their wildcard spot that they instead clinched the more prestigious title. What I'm saying is this, much like the Rochester weather, the snow will be around the corner even this late in the year, and it won't be kind to anyone that has to deal with the ferociousness of one of SPL's best. The other wildcard holder is Philadelphia Empoleon's Devontae, who I also mentioned in that first replay. Doster, being a complete newcomer to SPL, managed to pull off the rear feat of nearly dominating the competition and easily making the playoffs in only their first start. With his 2 losses coming from Fendi and one of the only 3 6-0s of the entire season, and Haj with a much closer 2-0, I'll reiterate just how difficult it is to tell how far everyone will get in the next 3 weeks. Dev has the advantage of running an extremely versatile team that doesn't rely solely on a single gimmick. But will it be enough? We'll know next week when he has to fight Shep. Now, I'll start off our divisional winners with New York Yankee Shept, who clinched the Concrete Division title. With the 4 losses to his name this season, technically he's the lowest ranked and quote-unquote weakest player heading into playoffs. However, the 2 previous seasons say otherwise, as Shep was a runner-up to SPL 1 and a semifinalist in SPL 2. His 4 losses were attributed to me, Haj, Nate, Fendi, who were all mostly finalists anyways, and with his first week win against Ryan, this only proves how tight of a bracket the postseason is. Shep's team is radically different from his initial draft picks, only keeping Ndidi and Anilip as permanent members. So, his opponents will essentially have to prep for an all-new team, and we may yet to see another strong postseason run from a constant top 4 contender. Zero Rings Division winner, Oklahoma City Thunder's Haj, is the 3rd seeding in the playoffs. This will be their first season to make it after only their 2nd start, rocking the full-on Sun team and the all-out offenses of the rest of his team. Haj ended up clinching his division title by upsetting the likes of Devontae and Colton, runner-up of SPL 2, in another horrific match, and only suffered 2 losses by Fendi, once again, and Los Angeles Cluffables Trey. In my original outlook of the season, I predicted I would be the one to fight Haj in a legendary rematch stemming from our SPL 2 encounter of Week 12. But as it happens, Haj will first have to fight a champion with a grudge for the shot at semis, so Godspeed Haj, you'll need it. As for the 2nd overall seed of SPL 3, that would be your host, me! Anyway, compared to my SPL 2 standings, going from 7th overall in the draft with 6 wins and 6 losses, I've massively improved my standings in the league with only 2 losses suffered against Devontae and Ryan. Again, much like the Rochester weather, it'll be either snowy or sunny, and we'll know soon enough whether Ryan or Haj must deal with the downpour of my Polytoad and Archalodon. All that's to be said about my team is that I brought the rain each and every week and will continue to do so until I reign supreme as SPL's 3rd champion. This leaves us with one other competitor, and I mentioned them multiple times for this reason. Rochester Reuniquist's Fendi has undoubtedly been the player to beat this season, scoring a perfect 10-0 record in this season with a defensively minded team. I haven't talked much about type cores, but as a tangent, I'll touch upon them now. Everyone knows about the Water, Grass, Fire trio. Even people who don't play Pokemon know this. Well, we have a couple other important trios of types that make your team infinitely harder to deal with. Dragon, Steel, and Fairy are quite important types to have around this gen as a form of checks. As it happens, Fendi has Forgus and Ferrothorn, high utility and defensively based Pokemon that are utterly impossible to kill in one shot, while his Dragapult is immensely quick with a base speed of 142. He also has access to Mega Banette, a low-ranked Mega in our draft, but it still comes with moves like Con Guard, the best defense boosting move in the game, the ability Prankster, and a ridiculously high attacking stat of 165. Not many know this either, but this team came after his original first pick, Walking Wake, was sniped as the 1st overall pick in the draft. This had Fendi scrambling to put together a backup team on the spot, and amazingly, the team that we see now is a team that has dominated the regular season. We have yet to see if this team will hold up against its future opponents in playoffs, but only time will tell. Lastly, before I close out the episode, I'd like to shout out the last match of the season between Python and Derek, in which we were treated instead to a half-hour-long Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl battle in which Python won 5-2. Now, I'm gonna be real, I have no idea what's going on in these games, but enjoy the short highlights I've been providing to you now. That's all I have time for today, but join us next time for a special episode where I'll be interviewing a special guest and go over the quarterfinal matches. Thank you for watching.